Hello, my burner community. How are you? Okay, I'm the last one before a break, and then there's some more people, great people after that. But let me just start with a Rumi quote, right? When at Burning Man, quote Rumi. 750 years ago, Rumi wrote the following. He said, "My life can be summed up in three phrases. I was raw, I became cooked, and then I burned." Digital life has accelerated our cooking time. There's a growing number of us who feel like we're like a carton of milk with a expiration date, as Kat was talking about earlier, stamped on our wrinkled foreheads. And many modern technologists believe that knowledge doesn't accumulate with time, but that it actually grows out of date. Last year was the first year that all baby boomers were 50 years old or older. But if you go back to the year 1900, the life expectancy rate was 47 years old. It grew to 77 years old by year 2000, and it might be 107 years old by the year 2100. If that is true, that at age 55, I am almost halfway, or maybe halfway through my life, which is a good feeling. Because I can go hang out at Fly Ranch a little bit more. So what's interesting, and I think one of the paradoxes of our time, is there's a group of people, we call them the baby boomers, who are living longer and healthier and in the workplace longer and feeling less and less relevant. Are we a carton of milk or a bottle of fine wine? Do we have some insight to offer you? Or is it time for us to get the hell off the stage? If the latter, I guess it's time for me to get off stage. But I'm an optimist, and I truly believe that, especially in the digital era, there is something that the elders can offer. And that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. Truthfully, historically, wisdom has flowed downhill. But this may be the first time where an intergenerational transfer of wisdom can happen such that it flows in both directions, both uphill from younger to older and downhill from older to younger, in a way that we can learn from each other. And that's again, the topic of my conversation with you tonight. So the last few years, I have experienced my own version of the recipe of being cooked and burned at the same time. I started a boutique hotel company when I was 26. I ran it for 24 years. I sold it, and I didn't know what the hell I was going to do next. How many of you ever saw Robert De Niro in the movie The Intern last year? I can't even see you. But it was a great film, came out last year. He said the following. He said, "Musicians don't retire. They stop when there's no more music left inside of them." So I knew that I still had some music left inside of me, but I just didn't know who I was supposed to share it with. And so that's how my experience got started the last 3 or 4 years, because I had the 3 young founders of a company called Airbnb approached me. Brian Chesky, who's one of the co-founders and the CEO, approached me in early 2013, and he said, "We want to take our small, fast-growing tech startup and turn it into a global hospitality giant." And he said, "We'd love to have you along for the ride and have you help us with that." So that was fine, but I had actually never heard of Airbnb. I'm such an old school hotel guy that in early 2013, I didn't really know what Airbnb was. And for that matter, I didn't have an Uber or a Lyft app on my phone in early 2013. I really was old school. So initially, I was a little intimidated. I'm a 52-year-old guy at that time who's being asked to join a tech company for the first time, where I'll be twice the age of the average person, and my boss, a really smart guy named Brian, the CEO, is 21 years younger than me. What would it feel like to actually have him give me a performance review for the first time when he's about the age of my son? So I said, yes, I'll do this. I tried it. I said, you know what can I lose? My first day on the job, I was sitting in a meeting room and someone asked a sort of tech existential question. If you created a product, if you created a feature, if you shipped a feature and no one used it, did the feature really ship? This is an existential question. I never learned it in philosophy in college, but I was bewildered. And I realized I was in deep ship because I didn't know what shipping a product meant. I never heard the phrase, I'm not a tech guy. By the end of my first week, I was dazed and confused. Brian had asked me to help him and to mentor him to grow the company. But after the first week, I felt more like an intern than a mentor. Could I simultaneously be a mentor and an intern? Yes, thank you. That's what I'm going to talk about. And that's really, for me, I've been lucky. It's been a great 3.5 years. I've been surrounded by some of the most inspiring people in Silicon Valley and have learned a lot. And that's what I'm going to share with you. I'm going to say there are 3 things that I've learned that I'm going to share now that have allowed me to share to the young and to actually receive it in return. Because I've learned just as much as I've given. So let me tell you what those 3 things are. The first one is, I'll sum it up by saying, I'll give you a little emotional intelligence if you give me a little bit of digital intelligence. Now, as we all know here on the playa, we don't spend a lot of time with our iPhones or our Galaxies or whatever our smartphone is. But there are a lot of us, and a lot of us who are younger, who actually know the face of our phone maybe better than the face of the person sitting next to us. Truthfully, there's people who actually understand that gadget and the screen better than the eyes of the person who they work with day to day. I'm not saying that young people don't understand emotions. They do, and we do. And in the digital life, we have emojis, which is one way to understand emotions. We also have a term, being an emo. I mean, back in my schoolyard days, I didn't know what an emo was, but it's a phrase that's relevant in the modern day. But the bottom line is, emojis are not the same as having interpersonal, face-to-face fluency, which is what we experience here at Burning Man. And I realized pretty early in my time, the first few weeks at Burning Man, at Airbnb, that I was surrounded by a bunch of people who are intensely smart and digitally savvy who might not realize that being emo savvy or emotionally savvy was what would make them a great leader. My friend Nancy Giordano, I'm going to actually pull out, the one thing I'm going to read today is a quote from my friend Nancy Giordano, who's a futurist, because I think her quote totally captures this. She said, "With little training, we expect young digital leaders to miraculously embody the relationship wisdoms we elders had decades to learn." So what I became committed to in those first few weeks is this sense of I want to help people understand how important emotional intelligence is to being a great leader. So even though it wasn't part of my job when Brian asked me to join, I created a learning and development function in the company so that 28-year-olds could help to lead 24-year-olds. And most importantly, part of the themes of this were, how do you help to actually create an alliance with someone who you're in conflict with? Or how do you walk into a meeting room, about to lead a meeting, and read the emotions of the room before you actually have started talking? So back in that film of last year, The Intern, the young CEO, Anne Hathaway, says that she doesn't want Robert De Niro to be her personal intern because he was a little too observant. Being too observant is what helped me to succeed at Airbnb. It's how I was able to become a close friend with people and to create an emotional bank account with those that I worked with. So I think no matter what kind of world you live in, whether you're in the B2B world, B2C world, C2C world, A to Z world, Business and life is H to H, human to human. And a lot of us forget that in the tech world. We think somehow that there are other qualities that are actually going to allow us to be successful leaders that don't speak to EQ or emotional intelligence. But the truth is that the more responsibility you have in an organization, the more EQ is important. Emotional intelligence author Daniel Goleman has shown that 2/3 of the success of leaders has to do with their EQ, and only 1/3 has to do with the combination of IQ or level of experience in the job. My second observation of the three was that learning never ends. William Yeats once wrote, "Education is not filling a pail, it's lighting a fire." So I was able to light a fire at Airbnb by being catalytically curious. I didn't know any better. The truth is that I was an old fart in a new company, and I'd never been in a tech company before. As such, I didn't have to be the expert. Yes, there were some subjects I was the expert on, but generally speaking, I was an intern a lot of the time. So I was able to have a beginner's mind. And if you have a beginner's mind, it means you don't have to live the habits of an expert. So it meant that I could actually act like a little kid and ask a lot of what, if, or why questions. Whereas most senior leaders get obsessed with the what and the how of business. I learned pretty quickly that it's better to intern publicly and mentor privately, because nobody wants to be actually criticized in a meeting by someone as old as their dad. I also learned that Peter Drucker, who's a famous management theorist, wrote 20 years ago, he said, the leaders of the past knew how to tell. The leaders of the future will know how to ask. In a constantly changing world, questions may trump answers. Excuse the use of the word Trump in that last sentence. So the traditional elders had the wise answers. The modern elders have the catalytic questions. And incidentally, Peter Drucker lived to the age of 95, and he translated his curiosity in life such that every 2 years, in those later years, he would study a subject that had nothing to do with his work, whether it was Japanese flower arranging or medieval war strategies. So I would ask you as an invitation for you to ask yourself, how can you be more curious? What's a subject unrelated to your work in which you can become one of the world's leading experts? My third lesson or revelation from being a modern elder amongst people who are half my age is that it's not always about know how. It can also be about know who. Google may be the best search engine in the world, but it doesn't understand nuance like a finely attuned human mind or heart. Yes, you can go out and search for the how, but sometimes it's the who's going to give you the revelation that you were looking for. I'm lucky enough to be a very curious soul. They called me Curious White Boy in my inner city high school in LA. And I have always been interested in people and things, and I've read a lot of books and met a lot of people, which means I guess that I'm well-read and well-connected. What I didn't expect in those first few months at Airbnb is that the word would get out that Chip is there and he knows a lot of things. He has a lot of a network of knowledge and people. And so I ended up becoming this person that not everybody, but a lot of people would come and talk to and say, I want to run an idea by you, or I want you to tell me if you know someone who might know about this. Now, I guess I became the ask me guy in the company. Now, I guess if you looked at all of the different people who came to me, like most of them are not people who directly reported to me or I worked with very closely, I always said yes to them because I thought I was going to learn something from them, and they'd learn something from me, hopefully, as well. But if you look at all of those people that I got to meet, especially in the first year or two in the company, I had created a web of relationships and knowledge that allowed me to be a strategic advisor to the founders, such that I really understand the pulse of what was happening in the company. It wasn't part of my job description, but because people knew that I knew things and I'd been around for a while, they wanted to tap into that. And that's important. And the truth is that modern organizations tend to be so full of speed and transactional nature. We don't help our young leaders to cultivate things like emotional intelligence or curiosity or relationship building. And so that's, at the end of the day, this has been, for me, a humbling and exhilarating journey. I thought I would run my company. The name of my company that I started 20 or 30 years ago almost was called Joie de Vivre, Joy of Life, boutique hotel company. I thought I'd run it for the rest of my life. And then at age 50, I was burned out. And I just needed to get out of there. And I sold it. I had no idea what would happen next. And then, of course, the Airbnb founders came knocking on my door. And I was able to join them. And that has been a really fortunate journey for me. Because I've learned from them just like they've learned from me. And the bottom line is, I believe that boomers and millennials have a lot to learn from each other. And I think all generations do. It's not just the boomers and the millennials, it's Gen Xers and everybody else. We have a lot to learn from each other. Those of us who are older, the older half of the population, are feeling less and less relevant. The younger half of the population are seeing power come to them faster than any young people have ever seen in the history of mankind. Partly because you people who are 40 and younger have a facility with the digital that those of us who are older don't generally, these are generalizations, don't have. So what I'm pondering is, how can we create a relationship? I like to call it the modern elder relationship. How could I be both potentially someone who's serving you, but also learning from you? How can I be a mentor and an intern? How can I relish being both a student and a sage at the same time? Now, this idea of intergenerational transfer of wisdom is particularly relevant to boomers. We're going to live 10 years longer than our parents, but power in a digital society is moving 10 years younger. So do the math. If we're going to live 10 years longer and power is moving 10 years younger, we have 20 years of additional obsolescence and irrelevancy, which can create some serious boomer angst. That's why we need to invest in the idea of modern elders. There are 3 times as many people in the workplace today over the age of 70 than there were a generation ago. And that number is only going to grow. And an interesting thing is that research has shown that when elders, actually people over 50, have a positive perspective on their aging, they happen to live on average 7.5 years longer, which is a larger increase in lifespan than those who actually start exercising or stop smoking. So if you have a positive perspective on aging, you live longer, which is beautiful. So this is not just a problem to be solved, it's an opportunity for society to take advantage of people who might have actually been considered past their expiration date. There's a beautiful African proverb that I want to quote to you now, and it is, when an elder dies, it's like a library has burned down. Unfortunately, in the digital era, libraries and elders aren't that popular anymore. But wisdom never grows old. And wisdom is about pattern recognition. And the longer you've been on this planet, the more patterns you've likely seen. Elders have always been there to support the growth of the young. But for the first time in our history on this earth as mankind, that wisdom can move in both directions. There can be a symbiotic sharing of wisdom from young to old and old to young in the gifting economy that is the future. I believe that modern elders need to rewrite Rumi's 3 phrases or phases of life. Maybe it should be, I was raw, I became cooked, I burned, and then I became raw again. Thank you so much. Enjoy your burn, and I wish you all the best.